Morning. Well, it's morning for me anyway. Got my coffee, but I usually have coffee anytime because I love coffee. Anyway, it's Chef Ken here, Culinary Jazz. We've recently been talking about basics like mise en place, getting things in order, getting yourself set up, knife skills, mirepoix, the basics in making soups and stocks and sauces. But we're unscripted here, never write a script, never plan anything, just do what comes up. Or I happen to be at my daughter's outside of Seattle. We were here for a couple of weeks, and my granddaughter had her 5th birthday party the other day, and we had a huge party. We had 3 briskets that I smoked outside. They don't have a smoker, but they do have a really nice, what brand is that grill? Weber grill. And I put chips in foil, put them right in the middle burner, and kept the briskets on the sides and had them smoking for about 4 or 5 hours, and then wrapped them and finished them in the oven for a couple more hours and put a little light sauce on them, and everybody loved it. We had a great time. We did have quite a bit left over, so we're eating good. And you might see over here that I've got half. I cut all the briskets in half just to make them easier to deal with. We're going to talk about meat cutting today. So brisket, I'll just go over the brisket quickly. So I lived in Texas for 13 years. I learned a lot about briskets, smoking, but I cut them in half to make it easier. Plus, if you know a brisket, this isn't a brisket, but if you know a brisket, it has the cap piece and it has the flat. With the cap piece on top of the flat, it's almost twice as thick, so they don't really cook equally. Plus, it's hard to maneuver. 15 pounds, it's hard. So I cut it in half, and so I had 3 briskets. I had 6 pieces. Anyway, I had one big piece with the fat cap on it here left, and there's so much of the other stuff that I sliced left for us to eat that I'm going to make soup out of that after I'm done with this other meat cutting. But the brisket was going to start with beef. We're talking about beef, and we're talking about meat cutting. When I went to school at the Culinary Institute, it wasn't called butchering, it was called meat cutting. That was the class. And going into it, I knew nothing. Shopped in a supermarket, and the meat is all on styrofoam with plastic. I have really no idea where it comes from, what it looks like. Didn't know anything about grades or anything like that. So we're going to try to get through this lightning fast, so pay attention. It's more than you probably want to know, but I'm going to go over it anyway. So the brisket, it's right up here, right just under your shoulder here. If I were a cow, I'm not. So that's where the brisket comes. But if I go back to the old days when I started in the business, restaurants, even hotels and restaurants, would buy either a forequarter or a hindquarter. And so when the steer is butchered, they cut it right down the backbone, right down the middle, and it usually comes out about they're about 400 to 500 pounds a side. So each quarter is going to be about 200 pounds. That's a lot to deal with. I don't even think in my best day I could carry all that. I would carry the whole leg, which has several names. Let's just say we used to call it a steamship round, the whole leg of beef. You've seen them, call them steamships, because that's what they fed on steamships in the old days, so they could feed everybody with one big roast. So you've probably seen them on buffets. But they weigh anywhere from 70 to 110 pounds. And I've cooked 1 million of those, and they're very hard to haul around. But then what happened when they started coming up with what's called primal cuts? And today, almost no one butchers in their own restaurant or even hotels. You buy primal cuts. Even in the ships, they buy primal cuts. So these are primal cuts. And they're graded. And the way they're graded is when the side, the whole side of the steer is there, the slaughterhouse takes it and they cut it in half, not all the way, just so that it opens. It'll open up like this, right? And then you'll see the eye of that meat. So the inspector can come by, they look at the fat, they look at a lot of different things. Mostly they're looking at the fat and they're looking at the meat for the marbling. This way they can get an eye at the marbling without you having to tear it all apart for them. And they can get a good idea of what the rest of it's going to be like. So they're going to grade it either prime, choice, standard, and then there's 4 below that. The last one is called canning, which is dog food, something like that. But they're all, so they, a lot of your institutions and stuff, they're going to use something below standard or choice. So when I started in the business, you use only prime, or what we called then top choice. They did away with top choice. They said we're going with just prime and just choice and standard. So what we have here, these are what I would call a top standard. If you look in it says USDA select, right? So it's select, so it's above standard. So when you're shopping and you see an advertisement that says Angus choice, you know that's just below prime. It's going to be a good, tender, juicy piece of meat. Prime, of course, there's no question. You don't even have to talk about prime. It's the best. Way, way too expensive for most people, especially too expensive for me. And if you know what you're doing, you don't need prime. You can have a good piece. So we've got, we get either choice or like this is the select. And I just opened one of these, and this one looks, I don't know how close you can see it. There's a lot of good marble in there. It's a good looking piece. The fat is white. That's good. The fat is going to be whiter and thicker on a prime. The fat cap on this is probably a 1/2 inch on average. It's going to be at least 1 inch on prime. And the eye of the meat on the prime is smaller. So you get to the middle, like right about here, on a prime piece of this, which is a New York shell, you get to that piece in here. The meat's only going to be this much meat and more than that of fat. Hard to believe, but that meat, oh, especially if it's dry age. Well, we'll get into dry age maybe a little bit later. So we're going to start breaking down the cow for you, because this is, as I said, this is where they cut it, right here. This end you see here is right where they split it, and they see this. You have one piece here, the other piece they split it, and it kind of opens up where they can see right into it. So I'll turn it over. This is a New York strip, New York sirloin strip. The USDA has numbers for every different primal cut. The side of beef is 100, number 100. That's how it starts. 101 would be the chuck, 4/4 chuck. Then you get to 150 would be the hind quarter. And then in between are all the primal cuts. This is a 180. It's called a 180, number 180 shell, right? That comes from the hind quarter. Where they cut it, below that is the hind quarter. So this comes from the hind quarter. It's a 180 shell. You can buy these with bones, without bones. You can buy them with a long tail, with a short tail. There are different numbers when you do that. This is 180, which is the most used. It's sometimes they call it like a 2x3. It has a lot of different names, but this is basically what you'll see if you get New York sirloin. This is what it's going to be, a 180 cut. When I started, we'd get these with the bones in it. All right, so I'm going to show you that before I go into the rest of it. All right, so this is where they cut it, split it, and it starts going that way. So when I roll this over, if you can tell on here, there's like a little slit here. This one they almost got wrong, right? Usually it's cut a bolt over here a little more, because this little slot here means there was a rib in there. It was the last rib. Cows have 13 ribs. We have 12. Cows have 13. We get the sheep and pigs. They have more, but we're not going to talk about them. Just talking about beef now. So from here, this piece right here has a rib. So the ribs go this way. So the next piece, and for the next 7 pieces, is the prime rib. Prime rib has 7 bones in it, right? So we got 7 and 1, that's 8. How many does that leave to make 13? 5. 5 are in the chuck. All right, so we're gonna go from, can you help me?
Yeah.
I'm gonna get Katie, my producer, director. All right, we're very similar, so let's look at here. All right, we're gonna cut it right about here, right? Now, you know your ribs are here. Your ribs go all the way around and touch at your breastbone, right? So, but right here, they take and they cut between that last rib. That's the hind quarter below it and the forequarter. So the prime rib is right here. Then up here where the other 5 ribs is called the chuck. You've heard of chuck most often for ground chuck. The reason being that chuck seems to be a little tough, although there are some tender pieces in it, but it's hard to get around. There's a lot of sinew and a lot of gristle in it. So they grind it up for chop meat, ground chuck. So an example of that would be, I love lamb chops, pork chops. I love lamb chops, and I like loin lamb chops best. Loin lamb chops have 2 pieces on it. They have like the New York sirloin and the filet mignon. And then the rib comes up to here, right? Then above that, you got shoulder. If you've ever eaten a shoulder lamb chop or a shoulder pork chop, it's all little pieces. You got to cut around all these little pieces, and you always end up getting some gristle in your mouth. That's why we like these the best, right? So again, I said the brisket was down under here, right? And you got the flank down here, and you got the navel over here. Now we get down there and you start talking. You're good now. Oh, thank you. So below that, you're going to get into from the sirloin. Now this is the sirloin. This comes from the short loin. Now the sirloin then at this end, I'll show you this end, looks very different. It's bigger, right? And it has something running through it we'll talk about in a minute when I cut it. But this piece then goes into what's called the top sirloin. Now, you know New York sirloin, to me, it is the most, the easiest to use in so many ways for grilling or roasting. You know, the chuck, you don't want to really grill or roast. You want to stew it or pot roast it. The prime rib, you know what that is. Prime rib, to me, it's not my favorite. It changes a lot. Just don't forget that this is a New York sirloin steak. The next one to it is what? Prime rib. When they roast that prime rib, you've got one end, which is this size, small. And it gets to the other end, by the chuck, where you'll see on a prime rib, you might get one. Happened to me in a restaurant all the time, really bugged me. People would order a prime rib, they say like whatever way they want to cook. I worked for an old German chef and he says, as it falls. You know, waiter would come in and say, somebody wants a medium rare. He said, as it falls. Whatever the next one cut is, that's what he said they get. That's it. But if you get down into that prime rib to the other end, the chuck end, you're going to see it starts having that not the decal, but the cap piece. And it also has 2 or 3 little pieces at the bottom. And it's kind of piecey, almost like a shoulder chop. And I say, you know, people would get that and they say, well, it's all great. And there's 2 big pieces to where, depending on where you cut it, there's 2 big chunks of fat in that, at that end. And people complain, it's all fatty, I don't want it. I said, well, this is the way it's made. God made the animal, and that's the way the animal is. And if you got you want the end cut, there's 2 end cuts. One end cut looks like this. 100% meat, beautiful. The other end is all piecey. It's a tough piece to make people happy about. This is pretty easy to make people happy. It's very versatile because it's tender, it's juicy, it's not too expensive. You don't have to order prime, and it's not filet mignon, which is very expensive. All right, so we're going to look at this side again here. So we got 1 rib. Then we're going to have 5 blade bones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blade bones. When I used to get them, I told you it would come with bones. And we'd take a knife. I didn't bring the knife out, but I'll show you the knife. We'd have to get these blade bones out, right from out of here. To get them out, if we took a boning knife or something, we'd dig in and ruin the meat. So we could get under that with a knife like this that would bend. We'd get under it and we'd go like this. And then we'd have to take a boning knife, and you see these little holes in here, we'd have to get these little knuckles out to pull it off of the backbone. But they don't come that way anymore, they come already, which is nice. All right, again, unscripted, I'm just winging it on what I know. Every day, talk about what a chef is. I try to mention what a chef is because it bothers me because people see somebody on TV who's a foodie and they made maybe 100 beautiful dishes at home and they're a chef. Unless you've done this every day, you've done everything from wedding cakes and ice carvings to garde manger work. Garde manger is the French for the cold station, but garde-manger means fancy, decorative, for everything from canapes to what we call chauffois. Chauffois is like a turkey or a ham that's decorated on a buffet. I've done a lot of that. So you have to know everything. Plus, know business. The chef is a lot. But every day I had to cut these. Every day I had to cut these in filet mignon. So that's the backbone along here. The other side of the backbone is from here back, not all the way up here, but from here back is the filet mignon. The filet mignon, then the head of the filet mignon goes into the top butt. If you can find butt tenders on sale, it is filet mignon, but it's the part that's in the top butt. So they pull this off the whole thing, and then they get that. But if they're going to want to make porterhouse steaks, they're going to cut through it right through the backbone. They get the New York sirloin. If you've ever had a porterhouse, you get the New York sirloin with a backbone and a blade bone, right? That's the blade bone, and the filet mignon. Now that filet mignon tapers till it disappears right about here, right? It just goes down to nothing here. As you get down there, if you have the bone on it and you're cutting steaks, they're no longer porterhouse. They're T-bones. The bone looks the same, but there's no filet mignon. So when somebody wants to cut a lot of that, they end up with this filet mignon that hasn't been pulled from the top sirloin. So sometimes those will go on sale. It's 100% filet mignon and much cheaper. Anyway, that's just a little tip because they used to sell those. But if you see them Costco or someplace, you say butt tenders, top butt tenders. That's the best buy you'll ever get. All right, getting back to this. We're talking about cutting, so we have to learn about cutting this and saving it and dividing it into portions, trimming it properly. There's a couple ways to do it. If you're at home, maybe the easiest way is just cut steaks and trim each one. I wouldn't do it that way, but you can do it that way if you're not sure of where to go with the knife. Like I said, it has a tail. If you'll see the tail here, if you go to a Ruth's Chris or a place like that, there's no tail. If you go to an average steakhouse, they're going to leave that tail on. There's a little piece of meat here and here, 2 little pieces, and they're good. But again, you got to fight to get them. So that's up to you. If you don't want to deal with those, you cut the tail all the way off. The trouble with that is you know where it is right here, and where it goes, you're not sure. You might end up cutting into the eye. So you have to be very, very careful. So in that case, I would say cut the steaks and then cut your tails off. Easiest. The most important thing, I'm going to get the fat out here, but the most important thing after you do that, and you have different knives to do that. I told you before, this is a very inexpensive $20 chef's knife, French knife, cook's knife, 10-inch blade, right? It's good for everything. Now, my daughter said the other day she wished she had a butcher's knife. This is a butcher's knife, but it's small. Like the purpose of one of the few times I'd say you could use a knife without holding on to the blade is if you're using this and you got a meat, but you don't have that anymore. If you had a piece of meat hanging, you had to cut it this way, you could do that. Then you have to be very careful. Anytime you take a knife and you're doing something like this, you do this. So if it slips, otherwise it'll slip like this. Same thing here. A lot of people will go like this. Watch this, watch this. This is the worst thing you could ever do. That's gonna kill you. You're gonna get cut. So you would do it with your hand over here. Now you have to know these animals and know the piece in order to trim this right. So this goes with about the same amount of fat along here, then it dives down and comes up like a little ski slope. So I know it, and I'm gonna try to follow that without cutting too much. Doesn't matter, you're still gonna cut into that meat at some point and say, oh, I got too close. But you'll see this is really, now see I cut into meat there, but guess what? That's a good thing in this case. And I'll tell you why in a minute when I get this off. And it's a shame the way they butcher meat today, they don't do it right. See where I got into it here? You see red there. Can you see that? I don't know if you can see it. Okay, so that red there, and this is really thin. This is the thinnest at this end. I'm not going to take any more. Now it's a little thicker here when you get to the tail. So you have the head and you have the tail. So I'm going to cut from the tail all the way down. And we got a buy on this. Was it $6.95 or $5.95 a pound?
$5.95.
$5.95 a pound. for this. Now, if you went and bought the steaks, the best buy you're ever going to get probably is $8.95 a pound. Now, of course, you got to trim some fat off it, so we're, you know, it's costing us more than $5.99. But see, I cut a tiny bit of that tail, no big deal. And you see here where this is going to dive down, way down here. And remember, whatever you don't get, you can always get after you trim the steaks. All right, and I'm going to cut these steaks a little different today, and I'll explain that too. Now, the most important thing about a New York strip, a New York sirloin 180 strip, most important thing, and I've never seen this before until a few years ago it started. Two things, two parts of this piece of meat, this 180 shell, two parts of it shouldn't go out as a steak in a restaurant or in a supermarket, but it does, it goes out. All right, so normally let me finish this part. I'm gonna use this one here. Across the head, remember, we got the eye, the head, and the tail, right? On the head. Right across here is something that we call a strap. It's a very, 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 you could make a belt out of it. It's very tough, silver skin. It's very, very tough. That should never be served, ever. Not on lamb, pork, veal, beef. You'll see it in supermarkets and even in restaurants. Not only is it hard to chew, you gotta cut it off. And if you don't know that, you might start putting it in your mouth by mistake and you end up in a nice restaurant chewing it and spitting it out. But the other thing it can do is it shrinks up in the heat. So that your steak that has this beautiful eye with a beautiful shape is gonna end up like that. You don't want that. So you've got to remove that. Anywhere you're gonna dig in and just use the knife up against it. You can see the knife can't even cut through it, so you don't have to worry about that. It's silver skin, taking off silver skin. If we could do a filet mignon one day, you're gonna see how much silver skin is on a filet mignon. And I have seen, you won't believe this, filet mignon, you're paying $18 a pound. They cut it into steaks. They take the fat off, thank you. They leave the silver skin on, the filet mignon. $18 a pound. And they didn't trim, and it's very thin on a filet. On a tenderloin, which I said is on the underside of this. Why is it so tender? Did somebody ask that? Why is this so tender? Why is this tender? I'll ask Katie if she knows why it's more tender. Katie's
I don't know.
Katie's an equestrian. We spent part of the day yesterday with her horse, a couple of her horses, and my granddaughter was riding, and horses kind of scare me, but she can do anything with a horse. She's not afraid of them. I'm a little afraid. So I asked her, why would this be tender, more tender than other parts? It's common sense. When I talk about cooking, I'm going to try to instill in everybody, if you don't have common sense, go buy some at a store. Find some common sense. But, you know, think about a bodybuilder or anybody with muscles. Why are those muscles bigger? What about it makes them bigger? You know, I have to keep doing something to make my muscle big. What do I have to keep doing? And why is it getting bigger? It's getting stronger. So the legs on a steer are going to be tougher. The shanks are going to be the toughest. The legs, the forequarters, the chuck, the hind quarter of the legs, that's top round, bottom round, eye round. They're tough. You talk about roast, prime rib we know is a good roast, right? We know that in the chuck there's some good roast, but you're still going to have the sinewy and the gristle you got to fight through. And a little toughness because that animal is working. Then you get back to beyond this, you get the top sirloin, which some they call rump or butt. That butt doesn't do much because it's up high. It's like they're saying high, we're eating high in a hog. That comes from eating the loin, the pork loin in the back. The back of the pig doesn't do much. It's all the quarters that do it. So same thing here. This is high in the hog, or high on the steer, right? So this is the more tender. Then as you get back, the butt is that way, and then as you move down from the top butt, you get the top sirloin, you get the bottom sirloin starts getting tougher. And then from there you go into the rounds. Like I said, the eye, the bottom, the eye, and the top round. The top round, if you look at your leg, is actually the back of your leg. So think top is back, top is the bottom. That's not bad, but people make steaks out of it. They may make roasts out of it. To me, it's not good for that. I like it for stew meat. Bottom round, eye round, only stew. Stew or pot roast. Do not try to make a steak out of those. Won't work. You're not going to be happy. So this is trimmed. This is it. I could stay here all day, but I want fat on it, right? So now you're done. It wasn't hard. You take that cryo. Now this is cryovac. If you don't never heard of cryovac, it's the meat, the vacuum sealed meat. Couple things about cryovac. Cryovac will keep meat fresh for, I don't want to say exactly, but at least 3 weeks to a month. And in 3 weeks to a month, you know what will happen to that in there? It'll actually age. Aged beef is usually dry aged. Hung and all the water falls out of it and bacteria gets in there and tenderizes the meat. Well, what this happened in the bag is there is live bacteria in there that's working and it starts to tenderize the meat. Doesn't sound good, does it? You keep one of these for 3 weeks and you open it. It has an odor. It's not pleasant odor, but it's not, well, you don't like run out of the room. You just pat it off and go ahead and cut it. And it'll be more tender and more tasty. But if you've never seen a dry-aged piece of meat hanging, there's this white moss-like looking fungus all over it. And green, it's green and white, and they trim all that off, and that's the best steak you'll ever have. So after cutting this, I usually cut from the other way, but for the camera, I'm gonna do it from here. Depends on what size, of course, you want. Now, some people will take this chain part off. I leave it. It's pretty tasty. There's fat in between, but it's chewable. So I leave that on. There's a chain on filet mignon. I take that off. All right, so here we are. We got this eye. These things started off about 15 pounds. I don't know what they ended up as, but it took that $5.95, $5.99 a pound into maybe $7.99 a pound. But still, a fully perfectly trimmed steak like this is going to cost you $8 or $9 a pound. So you want to cut a steak and you want a 12-ounce steak, then you're going to cut it about 3/4 of an inch. And when you cut meat, and that's a beautiful looking steak. It's got nice marble to it. It's got enough fat, not too much. Again, here's the tail. These two little pieces, you can eat them. I trimmed one for her last time I was up here visiting, and I took the tails off, and I put the tails in a bag and we froze them. Then, when I came back last week, I opened them up and I took all these little pieces out and I made a big pot of soup, beautiful soup. So that's possible. So there's a beautiful, now that I cut the tail off, you're looking at maybe 11 and a half ounce steak. But it's pretty much 100% edible, especially since that front part's off. Now the other thing I'm going to show you, which nobody ever does, they should, asking me is, you want 11-ounce steak. Why don't I cut a 20-ounce steak? So I'm going to cut a 20-ouncer. And when I'm cutting, not too much sawing because it leaves little cuts in the meat. You've got to constantly have your knife down. Drawing, sawing, but down. You're not going to make a lot of cuts. Oh, you want to see that clean cut. If you're going, you're going to have these little ridges in it. All right, so what I would like to do, now this got a big piece of tail. It's not going to be good just for a nice steak. So very simple, you just follow it, cut it off. It's gone. Now I like a thick steak. I can't eat all that. So why? No one ever does this. Why not? I got the head here, and I'm gonna just go like this. And basically, you've got like two 7-8 ounce white fillets, maybe 9 ounce. Nice and round and thick. So when you charbroil those, you're gonna have a thick, charred piece of meat. So that's one way to do it. So that's that way, and that's all there is to it. It's really pretty simple. So again, like I said on the grading, choice is more money than the select. The Select, as I just showed you, is really nice. This is a nice piece of meat. This would have been choice. They changed it over the years, but you don't find as much. You never would see a piece of meat in the supermarket 40 years ago that wasn't choice. It wouldn't even be there. Now you do. Now you see New York sirloin, $7.95, 99 a pound. Choice New York sirloin, $9.99 a pound. Try this. The Select is not. There's nothing wrong with it. It's really nice. We ate them the other night. They were delicious. Well, that's about all there is for now. Again, just off the cuff, just talking back and forth with my knowledge, my experience, and my passion for what I'm doing. Again, this is jazz. This is art. And this meat cutting is like you're getting together. You're an artist. You're getting together your acrylics or oils or your canvas or your paper, whatever you need to do, you're going to do. I'm getting it together by getting it. Do I need to take the steak? Am I going to saute this and make a sauce? Am I going to grill it and make a béarnaise sauce? But this is the base, getting things ready. It's part of mise en place, getting everything ready for what you're going to do. Planning your meal, getting it ready. To me, I like a grilled steak, but I want something on it. The last 2 times we had it here, we just did mushroom sauce. I showed you, I think I made it the other night. We had mushrooms and we didn't have red wine. We're not drinkers, so we don't have much wine. We had sherry left from onion soup last time we made onion soup here. Onion soup is a must, and sherry is a must in onion soup. So we had sherry left over, so all I did was saute some shallots and deglaze the pan with the sherry wine. Added some beef stock, which I made from vegetables and beef base and tomato paste. Added some of that to it and sauteed all the mushrooms, and then added the mushrooms, but there was a little flour in there just to give it a tiny bit of thickness, and it was absolutely out of this world fantastic. Grilled steak is beautiful, but you gotta have a little something with it. So we'll talk more about sauces, because to me they're very important. But anyway, New York sirloin, 180 shell. Buy it whole, it's cheaper. You can trim it. The other thing I wanted to show you, at this end, I almost forgot about this one. I told you, if you see steaks, New York sirloins, and you see, them in a pack of 3 or 4 of them, and they look like this, right? This is nice. And I don't know if you can see this, but in this one, there's a little gristle, sinew and gristle running through it. That would never be sold as a steak in my day, in a restaurant or in a supermarket. This is really good meat. This is part of the best. Costco sells just these cap pieces. It's delicious. But what I would do is either roast this whole as a thick roast or take this off, right? Follow this seam. Now you got one solid piece of meat that you can use for sirloin tips or whatever. Then you take this and take this piece off. Even though it's gristly, you could use some of this for soup. Now you've either just got a nice narrow little steak, which is fine, or you can chop it up for sirloin tips or brochettes. That's it. That's what you use it for. Or something good, nice Mexican, but you want it fajita, where you want the meat to be a little bit rare still, or medium rare. But when you see that, I left some of it here too. When you see a steak that has that, stay away, unless you know enough. If you have guests that don't know, they're gonna, oh, that's wonderful. And they're gonna cut a piece, put it in their mouth, and they're gonna have to do that napkin to the mouth. Oh, I can't chew that. Right through it. It's a little smile. We would always call it the nerve end. But you shouldn't see that in here. When you go next time to the supermarket, you look at a pack of 4 sirloin steaks. They're always gonna have one of them in there because they want to get rid of those. They're not gonna put 4 like that. They're not gonna put 4 nice ones. They'll probably put 2 or 3 nice ones and 1, maybe at the most 2 of the smiley faces. Well, that's it for now. Again, like I said, we're unscripted. We just try to have fun cooking and want to use our imagination, our creativity. It is an art. You're using your hands and you're creating. We can do cake decorating. We did a cake for my daughter, a beautiful cake. with it looked like it looked like a lake or something, and a big grassy area and a stone wall. And my daughter is granddaughter, my daughter and my granddaughter are horseback riders. So we had a couple horses on there. I didn't make the horses, but we put them on there. Beautiful cake. It was a marble cake, chocolate melon with a layer of chocolate ganache in the middle and a raspberry Bavarian cream. If you don't know what Bavarian cream is, we'll get into that. Oh, ganache and Bavarian cream, you can do so many things. We've got to learn those. So next time I'm here, we'll do that. I'm not going to be here probably for a couple months, but when I come back, we'll do that. My name is Chef Ken again, and may the art be with you. Have a good night. I'm done.